What happens when a life of limitless privilege collides with the cold, hard floor of reality? For Isabella Sterling, heiress to a billion-dollar empire, life was a series of open doors she couldn't be bothered to walk through. Kicked out of Columbia University, she was a disappointment in a Chanel suit. Her mother, the formidable CEO Victoria Sterling, delivered an ultimatum that felt like a death sentence. Trade the penthouse for the basement, the designer bags for a bucket and mop. This is the story of how a girl who had everything but valued nothing was forced to start at zero. It's a story about a janitor, a single father with a past shrouded in tragedy, who held the secret not to success, but to something far more valuable: self-worth. Stay with us to discover how the most important lessons aren't learned in a lecture hall, but in the quiet, empty hallways after everyone else has gone home. The dean's office at Columbia University was an exercise in curated intellectualism. Oak-paneled walls, leather-bound books that looked untouched, and a heavy mahogany desk separated Isabella "Izzy" Sterling from a man whose expression was a careful mixture of pity and finality. "Isabella," Dean Albright began, folding his hands, "your academic performance, or rather the lack thereof, leaves the board with no alternative. Your continued plagiarism on major essays and your failure to attend over 60% of your classes this semester constitutes a breach of the university's code of conduct. We are rescinding your enrollment, effective immediately." Izzy barely registered the words. She was more focused on a smudge on her pristine white Balenciaga sneaker. She'd paid a fortune for these shoes, and the idea that the floor of this stuffy office had dared to mar them was the most offensive thing that had happened all day. "Okay," she said, her tone laced with the casual indifference of someone who had never been told no. "So what does my mother need to donate to make this go away? A new library wing? A science center? Just give me a number." Dean Albright's face tightened. "Miss Sterling, this is not a negotiation. This is a matter of academic integrity. Your family's generosity is appreciated, but it does not purchase a degree." The finality in his voice finally pierced her bubble of entitlement. Panic, cold and unfamiliar, began to prickle at the back of her neck. This was real. The car ride back to the Sterling Tower penthouse was silent. The city blurred past the tinted windows of the Maybach, a world she owned but didn't belong to. Her mother, Victoria Sterling, sat opposite her. Victoria wasn't just a mother, she was a force of nature. A widow who had taken her late husband's modest real estate company and forged it into Sterling Enterprises, a global titan of architecture and development. Her face, usually a mask of calm, corporate control, was today carved from ice. She didn't speak until they were in her sprawling office on the 80th floor, the whole of Manhattan laid out beneath them like a circuit board. "Columbia called me an hour before you did," Victoria said, her voice dangerously quiet. She walked over to her desk, not to sit, but to stand behind it, a general surveying her battlefield. "They mentioned a donation. I told them not to expect a cent." Izzy flinched. "Mother, I can fix this. I'll reapply. I'll go to NYU, or—" "You will do no such thing," Victoria cut her off. "You have treated your entire life like a rough draft you can perpetually delete and rewrite. The tutors, the prep schools, the creative consultants for your college essays, all of it a waste. You lack the one thing I cannot buy for you: character." Izzy's throat felt tight. "That's not fair." "Fair?" Victoria's laugh was a sharp, brittle sound. "Fair is the multi-million-dollar trust fund you've been bleeding dry on closing parties. Fair is the world-class education you treated like a social club. The free ride is over, Isabella. As of this moment, your credit cards are canceled. Your access to the trust is frozen. The keys to your convertible are on my desk." Izzy stared, dumbfounded. "What am I supposed to do? You're cutting me off?" "No," Victoria said, her gaze unyielding. "I'm giving you a job. Your first real job. You will work here, in this building." A sliver of hope, maybe in marketing or PR. Something easy where she could coast. "Doing what?" Izzy asked, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. Victoria picked up an ID card from her desk. The photo was a candid shot of Izzy, looking bored and annoyed, taken by security last week. The title beneath it read, "Isabella Sterling, Facilities and Maintenance Staff." Izzy blinked. Facilities? Like the IT guys? Lower, Victoria said. You start tomorrow, 6 p.m. Your supervisor will meet you in the sub-level 2 loading bay. His name is Liam O'Connell. He's the night shift custodial foreman. You will be cleaning toilets, mopping floors, and emptying trash cans in the very building that bears our name. You will earn a minimum wage, and from that, you will pay rent for the studio apartment I have arranged for you in a walk-up in Queens. You will learn the value of a dollar, the dignity of labor, and what it feels like to start at absolute zero. You will do this for 6 months. If you quit, if you fail, you are cut off permanently. Consider this your final pass-fail test. Izzy felt the world tilt on its axis. Her, Isabella Sterling, a janitor. It was a nightmare, a cruel joke. But one look at her mother's resolute face told her it was deadly serious. The gilded cage had just become a prison, and the floor was a lot further down than she had ever imagined. The sub-level 2 loading bay of Sterling Tower was a world away from the gleaming marble lobby and the hushed, expensive air of the executive floors. Down here, the air was thick with the smell of diesel fumes, damp concrete, and industrial-grade disinfectant. The glamour of the Sterling name did not penetrate this deep. Izzy stood awkwardly by a stack of pallets, feeling utterly alien in her mandatory uniform, a drab, gray jumpsuit that was both too baggy and too tight in all the wrong places. Her Hermes Birkin bag had been replaced by a cheap plastic locker key clutched in her hand. The rhythmic thump-thump-thump of a massive ventilation fan was the only sound. At precisely 6 p.m., a man emerged from a doorway marked Custodial Services. He was tall, with a lean, wiry strength that his simple work clothes couldn't hide. His hair was dark, his face carried the kind of quiet exhaustion that seemed permanent, but his eyes, a clear, startling blue, were sharp and observant. He looked to be in his late 30s. "You're Sterling?" he asked. His voice was calm, with a low timbre that didn't echo in the cavernous space. "Isabella," she corrected him automatically, a reflex of her old life. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Liam O'Connell. Welcome to the night shift." There was no warmth in his greeting, but no malice either. It was purely functional. "Your locker's inside. Stow your personal items. We start with the financial sector, floors 42 to 48. They're the last to leave." The custodial office was a cramped, cluttered room filled with the smell of bleach and stale coffee. A handful of other night shift workers, older men and women, speaking a mix of Spanish and English, nodded at her with weary curiosity. She was an anomaly, a glitch in their routine. Liam handed her a cart stocked with bottles of chemicals, rags, trash bags, and a mop bucket. "This is your station. Rule 1, never mix ammonia and bleach. Rule 2, always put up a wet floor sign. Rule 3, do the job right the first time, so you don't have to do it a second time. Questions?" Izzy had a million. "Can I just pay someone to do this for me? Is this a reality TV show? Do you have any idea who I am?" She settled for no. The first hour was a masterclass in humiliation. The trash cans on the trading floor were overflowing with discarded Starbucks cups and takeout containers. The sheer volume of waste produced by people who sat in chairs all day was astounding. Her first attempt at changing a large trash bag resulted in it splitting, spilling a sticky mixture of old coffee and soggy salad onto the pristine carpet. Liam appeared as if from nowhere. He didn't sigh or scold. He simply retrieved a spot cleaner from his own cart. "Spray, blot, don't rub. Rubbing grinds it in," he said, demonstrating the technique. He worked with an economy of motion that was almost graceful. "You see the stain? You start from the outside and work your way in. That contains it. It's like any problem. You define the borders first." Later in the executive washroom, a place she'd used countless times to touch up her makeup, she stared at the toilets as if they were alien artifacts. The task was simple, yet she found herself hesitating, repulsed. She did a cursory, clumsy job, splashing water on the floor and leaving streaks on the chrome fixtures. Liam inspected her work a few minutes later. He ran a finger over a faucet, then looked at it. "This is a smudge. Means you use the wrong cloth. You use microfiber for polishing, terry cloth for scrubbing. It's about using the right tool for the job." He paused, his blue eyes meeting hers in the reflection of the mirror. You think this is just cleaning, don't you? Izzy shrugged, defensive. Isn't it? On the surface, he said, his voice dropping slightly. But it's really about restoration. It's about respect. The people who work in this building, they work hard. They're stressed. They don't need to come into a dirty bathroom. A clean space gives them a moment of peace. It shows someone cares. We're the invisible foundation of this whole place. We take the chaos of the day and we reset it back to zero. So they can start fresh tomorrow. He wasn't lecturing her. He was teaching her. And for the first time, Izzy felt a flicker of something other than anger and self-pity. He wasn't just a janitor. He saw a philosophy in his work, a purpose she couldn't comprehend. The night wore on. Her back ached. Her hands, usually soft and manicured, were raw and chapped. She learned the distinct, back-breaking motion of mopping a long hallway, the specific angle to hold a squeegee to leave glass streak-free. By the time their 2 a.m. break rolled around, she was bone-tired and starving. She sat in the break room, nursing a lukewarm coffee from a vending machine. Liam was at a small table, meticulously sketching in a worn notebook. His drawings were not doodles. They were intricate and precise. She caught a glimpse of what looked like the support structure of a bridge, rendered with an architect's eye for detail. "What's that?" she asked, her curiosity overriding her exhaustion. He closed the notebook quickly, a flicker of something, sadness maybe, in his eyes. "Nothing, just a habit." He stood up. "Break's over. Time to do the lobby. It's the last thing people see when they leave, and the first thing they see when they arrive. It has to be perfect." As she followed him out, buffing the vast marble floors under the soaring atrium of Sterling Tower, Izzy felt the crushing weight of her new reality. This perfection he demanded was achieved through monotonous, grueling labor. And as she watched her own tired reflection glide across the polished stone, she realized she was part of that labor now. She was one of the invisible people who reset the world back to zero, night after lonely night. The first 2 weeks were a blur of misery. Izzy moved into the cramped Queen's apartment. It was clean but small, with a radiator that hissed and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. The contrast to her penthouse with its panoramic city views was a daily brutal reminder of her fall from grace. Her wage after taxes and her non-negotiable rent left her with barely enough for groceries and a subway pass. She learned the humbling math of survival, counting dollars instead of dismissing thousands. She tried to quit, of course. On the 4th day, she stormed into her mother's office, her jumpsuit reeking of lemon-scented cleaner. "I can't do this," she announced. "It's degrading. It's not for me." Victoria didn't even look up from the quarterly report she was reading. "Then you are free to leave. The security guard downstairs will accept your ID badge. Your apartment keys will be deactivated by noon tomorrow. I wish you the best of luck in finding your own way in the world, Isabella." The cold, final threat hung in the air. Izzy was trapped. Defeated, she returned to the basement. Her work remained sloppy, her attitude resentful. She did the bare minimum, cutting corners wherever she could. Liam was a constant, quiet presence. He never raised his voice, but his disappointment was a palpable force. He would simply redo her work, his silent actions a louder rebuke than any criticism. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday night. The work was harder. Every person entering the building tracked in water and grime. Izzy was tasked with cleaning a series of conference rooms on the 65th floor. Annoyed and exhausted, she rushed the job, leaving a faint, sticky residue from a spilled soda on the carpet near the main table. An hour later, Liam's voice came over the small radio on her belt. "Izzy, meet me in conference room 65A. When she arrived, she saw him kneeling on the floor, working on the spot she had missed. But he wasn't alone. A little girl, no older than 8, with wide, curious eyes and 2 dark braids, sat quietly in one of the large executive chairs, sketching in a coloring book. She was a miniature version of Liam. "My sitter had a family emergency," Liam said by way of explanation, not looking up from his work. "This is Lily. Lily, this is Izzy. She's learning the ropes." Lily looked up and gave Izzy a shy, sweet smile. "Are you learning how to fight the chaos monster?" Izzy blinked. "The what?" "That's what Daddy calls it," Lily said, holding up her coloring book. The mess people leave behind. He says you make everything calm again for the morning people. The simple, innocent words struck a chord deep inside Izzy. Reset it back to zero. It was the same thing Liam had told her, now filtered through the imagination of a child. Yeah, Izzy heard herself say. I guess that's what we do. Liam finished the spot and stood up. You missed it, he said, his tone neutral. It's important to be thorough. If you leave a small mess, it tells people you don't care about the big picture. He looked at Lily, and his entire demeanor softened. The weary foreman disappeared, replaced by a loving father. Ready for our break, Firefly? Lily nodded eagerly. In the break room, Liam carefully unpacked a small dinner for her. Mac and cheese in a thermos, apple slices, and a cookie. He and Izzy sat in silence while Lily ate, her small feet swinging happily from the chair. The scene was so normal, so tender, it felt profoundly out of place in the sterile industrial break room. Suddenly, Lily began to cough. It started as a small tickle, but quickly escalated into a series of harsh, wheezing gasps. Liam was on his feet in an instant, his face a mask of controlled fear. Okay, Lilybug, deep breaths. Where's your puffer? He asked, his voice a strange mix of soothing and urgent. Lily, her face pale, pointed a trembling finger at her small pink backpack. Liam's hands shook slightly as he fumbled with the zipper, pulling out an inhaler. He helped her administer the medicine, murmuring soft, reassuring words until her breathing slowly, painstakingly, returned to normal. Izzy sat frozen, her heart pounding. She had never witnessed anything so terrifying, so intimate. The raw vulnerability of it stripped away every defense she had. After a few minutes, Lily was breathing easily again, leaning her head against her father's chest. Sorry, Liam said quietly, his gaze fixed on his daughter. She has asthma. The dust in older parts of the building can sometimes set it off. Is she okay? Izzy asked, her voice barely a whisper. She will be. We manage it. He looked at Izzy, and for the first time, she saw past the janitor. She saw a man carrying an immense weight, a father who would walk through fire for his child, a man who took a low-stress, night-shift job not because he lacked ambition, but perhaps because he needed to be completely and utterly present for this little girl. Later that night, long after Lily had fallen asleep on a makeshift bed of coats in the office, Izzy found herself in a supply closet, restocking her cart. The reality of what she had seen, Liam's fear, Lily's fragility, overwhelmed her. The sheer, pointless vanity of her own life, her complaints about her shoes or her apartment, felt obscene. She leaned her head against the cool metal shelf, and for the first time since this ordeal began, she cried. Not tears of self-pity, but of a profound, shattering shame. She felt a presence at the door and looked up to see Liam standing there, his expression unreadable. He didn't say anything. He just handed her a clean, dry rag from his belt. She took it, wiping her eyes. I'm sorry, she mumbled. About the carpet, about everything. He nodded slowly. Start again tomorrow, he said softly. That's all any of us get to do. He left her there in the quiet solitude of the closet. When Izzy finally emerged, something inside her had shifted. The polished veneer of her old self had cracked, and for the first time, she was willing to see what lay beneath. She was ready to start at zero. The change in Izzy wasn't instantaneous, but it was undeniable. She started showing up 10 minutes early. She asked questions. She watched Liam, not with resentment, but with a student's focus. She learned the subtle art of her new trade, how to use a floor buffer without leaving swirl marks, the precise chemical mixture to remove permanent marker from a whiteboard, the quiet satisfaction of seeing a chaotic space transformed into one of order and calm. She started talking to the other members of the night crew. She learned that Maria, the woman who cleaned the executive suites, was sending money back to her family in the Philippines to put her grandson through college. She learned that Jorge, the quiet man who handled recycling, was a talented musician who played in a band on weekends. These weren't just janitors. They were people with lives, hopes, and struggles as complex and valid as any CEOs. Her world, once a tiny, self-centered bubble, was expanding. Her relationship with Liam evolved into a quiet mentorship. He taught her about more than just cleaning. He spoke of structural integrity when pointing out a crack in the plaster. He talked about airflow and ventilation systems. He explained how the placement of lights affected the mood of a room. He saw the building not as a series of floors to be cleaned, but as a living, breathing entity. One night, while they were clearing out a storage room that was being converted into a new office, Izzy stumbled upon a dusty portfolio case tucked behind a stack of old filing cabinets. It was heavy. Curiosity piqued, she opened it. Inside were not old documents, but a series of breathtaking architectural drawings. They were hand-drawn, a lost art in the age of CAD software. There were designs for a cantilevered bridge that seemed to defy gravity, a public library that spiraled toward the sky like a seashell, and a residential home that seamlessly integrated with a cliff face. The work was brilliant, innovative, and beautiful. In the bottom corner of each drawing was a small, elegant signature, L. O'Connell. Izzy's breath caught in her throat. She looked at Liam, who was methodically breaking down cardboard boxes across the room. This man, her boss, the janitor, was an artist, a genius. She carried the portfolio over to him. Liam, what is this? He froze when he saw it, the color draining from his face. For a moment, he looked like a man confronted by a ghost. He slowly took the case from her, his fingers tracing the worn leather. Where did you find this? He asked, his voice strained. Behind the cabinets. Liam, these are incredible. This is professional work. He sank onto a nearby crate, the portfolio resting on his knees. He was silent for a long time, the only sound the hum of the building around them. This was another life, he said finally. He began to talk, and Izzy listened, mesmerized. Liam O'Connell had been a rising star at Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, SOM, one of the most prestigious architectural firms in the world. He was a protege, the one everyone watched, lauded for his visionary designs and his understanding of structural poetry. He had a wife, Elena, a landscape architect he'd met in college. They were a golden couple, with a beautiful baby girl, Lily, and a future as bright as his designs. Then Elena got sick, a rare, aggressive form of cancer. They threw everything they had at it, the best doctors, experimental treatments. His high-paying job couldn't keep up with the mountain of medical bills not covered by insurance. He sold their apartment, cashed in his retirement funds, and eventually left his demanding job at SOM to become her full-time caregiver. For 2 years, my only project was her, he said, his voice thick with memory, designing her comfort, restructuring our lives around her treatments. But in the end, there was no brilliant design that could fix it. After Elena passed away, Liam was left with a mountain of debt and a heartbroken little girl who needed her father more than ever. The high-pressure world of elite architecture, with its 80-hour work weeks and constant travel, was no longer an option. He needed stability. He needed a job that ended when he clocked out, a job that allowed him to be home to make Lily dinner, to read her bedtime stories, to be there if her asthma flared up. A friend of a friend told me about an opening here, he said, looking around the storage room. Night shift foreman. It was steady. It was anonymous. No one knew who I was. I could just be a dad. That's all Lily needed me to be. Izzy was speechless. The quiet dignity she had always sensed in him suddenly had a history. His patience, his wisdom, his philosophical approach to his work. It all made sense. He wasn't a man who had ended up here. He was a man who had chosen to be here, sacrificing his own ambition for his daughter's well-being. He had willingly started his own life over from zero. Why didn't you ever go back, she asked gently, to architecture? He looked at the drawings in the portfolio, a deep sadness in his eyes. That part of me died with her. I poured all my creativity, all my passion into my work. When I lost her, I lost the source of it. All I have left is a technical understanding. He closed the case with a soft click. Now, I just build Lego castles with Lily. The scale is smaller, but the stakes are higher. He stood up, his composure regained. We should get this room finished. But Izzy couldn't move. She was looking at him with a new, profound sense of awe. Her own problems, her own fall from grace, seemed laughably insignificant in comparison. She had been stripped of her luxuries. He had been stripped of his life's love and his life's work. Yet he faced each day with a quiet strength she couldn't begin to fathom. That night, she didn't just see a janitor or a mentor. She saw a hero, hiding in plain sight, sweeping the floors of a world he had once been destined to build. And a new, fierce sense of purpose began to smolder within her. The world needed to see it, too. 3 months into her 6-month sentence, Izzy had found a rhythm. She was no longer just an heiress playing janitor. She was a competent member of the facilities team. She took pride in her work. The respect she had earned from Liam and the rest of the crew meant more to her than any designer label ever had. The calluses on her hands were like badges of honor. Her relationship with her mother remained frosty and distant. They communicated only through Victoria's assistant regarding payroll and other work-related necessities. Victoria observed her daughter's transformation from afar, through security reports and brief sightings in the lobby, but she made no move to bridge the chasm between them. To her, this was an experiment, and the results were still pending. The crisis struck on a Monday morning. Sterling Enterprises' newest, most ambitious project was the Solstice, a state-of-the-art 90-story residential skyscraper in Dubai. It was a marvel of modern engineering, designed by a celebrity architect, and was meant to be the crown jewel of the Sterling portfolio. The problem was subtle, but catastrophic. A senior engineer on the project, reviewing the final construction schematics, discovered a harmonic resonance flaw. Under a specific but plausible combination of high winds from a certain direction, the top third of the tower could develop micro-vibrations that would amplify over time, potentially leading to structural fatigue and, in a worst-case scenario, failure. The news hit the 80th floor like a shockwave. Construction was halted. The potential financial losses were staggering. Hundreds of millions in delays, contract penalties, and the immeasurable damage to the Sterling brand. Victoria Sterling convened an emergency meeting with her top architects and engineers from the prestigious firm of Thornton and Vance. For days, the brightest minds in the company were locked in the main boardroom, poring over blueprints and running simulations. The atmosphere in the tower was tense. The anxiety on the executive floors was so thick you could taste it. Their proposed solutions were all brutal. The most viable option involved reinforcing the building's core with a massive tuned mass damper, a complex pendulum-like structure. It was an engineering nightmare that would cost a fortune, sacrifice several floors of luxury penthouses, and delay the project by at least 2 years. Victoria saw her legacy beginning to crumble. Izzy knew all of this because the night crew had to clean up the aftermath of these marathon sessions. The boardroom was littered with empty coffee cups, crumpled papers, and the palpable scent of desperation. One evening, while emptying a recycling bin, she saw a discarded schematic of the Solstice's upper framework. It was covered in red ink, marking the problem areas. She looked at the complex latticework of steel and concrete, and something clicked. She remembered the drawings in Liam's portfolio, the elegant, almost organic way he solved impossible structural challenges. He didn't just use brute force. He worked with physics, redirecting stress and energy in ways that were both efficient and beautiful. An idea, audacious and terrifying, began to form in her mind. She found Liam in the sub-level workshop, carefully repairing the motor on a faulty floor buffer. "Liam, I need you to look at something," she said, her voice trembling slightly. She spread the crumpled schematic on his workbench. "It's the Solstice project. They have a harmonic resonance problem they can't solve without gutting the top floors." Liam wiped his greasy hands on a rag and leaned over the paper. His eyes, so often tired, sharpened with an intensity Izzy had never seen before. He traced the lines with his finger, his lips moving silently as he made calculations in his head. For 10 minutes, he was completely lost to the world, the janitor foreman replaced by the master architect. "They're thinking about it all wrong," he murmured, almost to himself. "They're trying to fight the resonance, to dampen it, brute force." He grabbed a piece of scrap paper and a pencil. "But you can't fight the wind. You have to dance with it." His hand moved with a speed and confidence that was hypnotic. He began to sketch, not a massive damper, but a series of subtle external additions. It looked like a series of fins or baffles, aerodynamically shaped and strategically placed along the corners of the upper floors. It's a principle from aeronautics, he explained, his voice animated with a passion she had never heard. They're called helical strakes. You see them on factory chimneys. They disrupt the airflow, break up the uniform wind pressure, the von Karman vortex street, before it can create a synchronized oscillation. It doesn't dampen the resonance. It prevents it from ever forming in the first place. He sketched on, adding details. You wouldn't even have to alter the core structure. These can be fabricated and integrated into the existing curtain wall system. It's an external fix, a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. It would barely impact the budget, and it would make the tower's silhouette even more unique. He stopped, suddenly aware of what he was doing, of the fire that had been rekindled inside him. He looked at the brilliant, simple solution on the scrap of paper, and then at Izzy, his expression guarded once more. It's just theory, he said, crumpling the paper. No, Izzy said, snatching it from his hand before he could throw it away. No, this is the answer. Liam, you have to show them. He shook his head, the light in his eyes dying out. Show who, Izzy? The board? The celebrity architect who designed this? I'm the janitor. They would laugh me out of the room. They won't if I'm with you, she insisted, her voice filled with a conviction that surprised even herself. My name still opens one door in this building. My mother's. Liam looked at her, at the fierce determination in her eyes. He saw the entitled girl she had been, but he also saw the resilient, empathetic woman she was becoming. He saw his own long-buried passion reflected in her belief in him. She'll never listen, he said, but his voice lacked its earlier certainty. Let me worry about my mother, Izzy said, carefully smoothing out the crumpled piece of paper that held the key. You just have to be willing to walk through the door with me. It's time for the people on the 80th floor to see what really happens in the basement. This was her test, not one her mother had designed, but one she was choosing for herself. It wasn't about mopping floors or earning a wage. It was about fighting for someone else, about believing in the hidden genius of a man the world had forgotten, and about proving that true value could be found in the most unexpected of places. Getting past the gatekeeper, her mother's executive assistant, was the first hurdle. Izzy, still in her gray jumpsuit at the end of her shift, was a jarring sight in the hushed, opulent reception area of the 80th floor. I need to see my mother. It's urgent, Izzy told the assistant, a woman named Clara who had known her since she was a child. Clara's face was a mixture of pity and professional stonewalling. Ms. Sterling is in an all-day emergency session with the Thornton and Vance team. She left explicit instructions not to be disturbed. Clara, please, Izzy pressed, her voice low and firm. This is about the solstice. I have something she needs to see. It could save the entire project. The claim was so audacious, so absurd coming from the company's newest janitor, that it piqued Clara's curiosity. Seeing the desperate sincerity in Izzy's eyes, she relented. 5 minutes, Izzy. That's all I can promise. Victoria Sterling looked up as her daughter entered the boardroom, her expression a thundercloud of annoyance. She was flanked by a dozen grim-faced men in expensive suits, the architects and engineers who had failed to find an elegant solution. Isabella, this is wholly inappropriate, Victoria snapped. Whatever this is, it can wait. No, it can't, Izzy said, walking directly to the head of the massive table. She could feel the condescending stares of the architects, but she ignored them, her focus entirely on her mother. You're about to approve a $200 million mistake that will gut your flagship project. A senior architect, a portly man named Mr. Vance, scoffed. And I suppose you, with your newfound expertise in sanitation, have a better idea? The room chuckled. Izzy's cheeks burned, but she held her ground. I don't, but I know someone who does. She turned and opened the boardroom door. Liam O'Connell stood in the hallway. He had changed out of his work uniform into a simple, clean button-down shirt and trousers, but his exhaustion was plain to see. He held a roll of drafting paper in his hand. He looked uncomfortable, out of place, a ghost from another world. Victoria's eyes narrowed. The custodial foreman? Isabella, have you lost your mind? Get him out of here. Mother, for once in your life, will you please just listen? Izzy's voice cracked with emotion, but it was steel-edged. For 5 months, you've had me working at the bottom of this company to learn its value. And the most valuable thing I have learned is that you and everyone in this room have no idea who really keeps this place running. You look at this man and you see a janitor. I look at him and I see the most brilliant architect I have ever known. A stunned silence fell over the room. Liam stepped forward, his reluctance warring with the flicker of resolve Izzy had ignited in him. Mr. O'Connell, Victoria said, her tone dripping with ice, worked for SAM a decade ago, a junior associate with some promise who left the industry. That hardly qualifies him to critique the work of the top minds at Thornton and Vance. Liam met her gaze directly. With all due respect, ma'am, the wind doesn't care about a person's resume. It only cares about the shape of the object in its path. He walked to the table and unrolled his drawing. It wasn't a crumpled scrap anymore. He had stayed up all night using the drafting tools he hadn't touched in years to render his idea with breathtaking precision. He laid out the clean, elegant schematic of the tower, complete with his proposed helical strakes. He began to explain. His voice, usually so quiet, filled the room. He spoke of fluid dynamics, of vortex shedding, of aerodynamic solutions that were both structurally sound and aesthetically pleasing. He didn't use jargon to impress. He used it to teach. The condescending smirks on the faces of the other architects slowly faded, replaced by looks of grudging curiosity, then dawning comprehension, and finally sheer astonishment. Mr. Vance, the senior architect, stepped forward, peering at the drawing. This is based on the work of Scruton and Walsh, the research on cylindrical structures. It is, Liam confirmed, but adapted for a square-form skyscraper. The strakes don't have to be symmetrical. They can be designed as an architectural feature, a part of the building's identity, while disrupting the laminar airflow that causes the oscillation. He fielded their technical questions with an ease and depth of knowledge that left them speechless. He was no longer a janitor. He was a master of his craft, reawakened. He had taken their problem and, starting from the foundational physics they had overlooked, starting from zero, he had found an answer that was not only better, but orders of magnitude cheaper and faster to implement. The room was silent for a full minute after he finished. Finally, Mr. Vance looked at Victoria. "My God," he said, his voice hushed with awe. "He's right. It's brilliant. It will work." All eyes turned to Victoria Sterling. Her face was pale, her corporate armor completely shattered. She wasn't looking at the drawing. She was looking at her daughter, who stood beside Liam, her posture radiating a fierce, protective pride. Victoria saw it all in that moment. The failure of her own judgment, the arrogance of her entire world, and the incredible, unrecognizable strength in her own child. Izzy hadn't just found a solution to an engineering problem. She had crossed the vast, invisible divide between the basement and the boardroom. She had championed a forgotten man, recognized his worth when no one else would, and in doing so, had proven her own. The test was over, and she had passed in a way Victoria had never imagined possible. The silence that descended upon the boardroom was heavier than the thick glass of the conference table. The architects from Thornton and Vance, men who commanded six-figure salaries for their vision, stared at the elegant, hand-drawn schematic as if it were a sacred text. The air, once thick with condescension, was now charged with the electric shock of pure, undeniable brilliance. Mr. Vance, his face flushed, slowly lifted his gaze from the drawing to Liam, his expression a cocktail of humiliation and profound respect. "He's right," Vance repeated, his voice barely a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the revelation. "It's perfect. It's the kind of solution you look for your entire career. Elegant, efficient, foundational." Victoria Sterling remained motionless at the head of the table, her corporate armor so thoroughly breached that she seemed smaller in her power chair. She wasn't looking at the drawing or the humbled architects. Her gaze was locked on her daughter. She saw Isabella not as the perpetual disappointment, the spoiled heiress, but as a warrior. She stood beside Liam, her stance protective, her chin high, her eyes blazing with a righteous fire Victoria had never seen. In that moment, Victoria realized her experiment had succeeded in a way she had never intended. She had sent her daughter to the basement to break her spirit, but instead Izzy had found its heart and brought it to the 80th floor. Victoria finally cleared her throat, the sound cutting through the thick silence. She stood, her movements deliberate. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice steady but devoid of its usual icy authority, "it appears we owe Mr. O'Connell not only our gratitude, but a profound apology for our short-sightedness." She turned her full attention to Liam. "On behalf of Sterling Enterprises, thank you. Your contribution today has been invaluable." The public acknowledgement was a clear signal. This victory was his, and his alone. Izzy felt a surge of relief so powerful her knees almost buckled. She had gambled everything on this moment, and it had paid off. She watched as the architects, one by one, approached Liam, shaking his hand, their voices a murmur of technical questions and genuine admiration. He was no longer the janitor. He was their peer, their superior even. He was an architect again. The next morning, an official invitation was delivered to Liam's small apartment. It requested his presence in Victoria Sterling's office. When he arrived, Izzy was already there, not as a defendant or an employee, but as an invited participant, sitting in one of the plush chairs opposite the great desk. The power dynamic had been irrevocably altered. Victoria began, foregoing all corporate preamble. "Mr. O'Connell, I'll be direct. What you did yesterday was extraordinary. It saved this company from a catastrophe of its own making. I am here to make you an offer. I want you to join Sterling Enterprises as a senior design consultant. We will create the position for you." She slid a folder across the desk. "Inside, you will find a contract. The salary is $750,000 a year, with a considerable signing bonus to recognize your contribution to the solstice. We want your mind. We need it." The number hung in the air, a life-altering sum that could rewrite Liam's entire existence. He could buy a house, afford the best possible care for Lily, and erase the mountain of debt that had shadowed him for years. Izzy held her breath. Liam looked at the folder but didn't open it. He met Victoria's gaze with his calm, steady eyes. "Ms. Sterling, the offer is beyond generous, and I am grateful for it. But my life taught me that some things aren't measured in salary figures." He reached into his own simple satchel and pulled out a single sheet of paper, placing it on the desk. "These are my terms." Victoria picked it up. It was not a list of financial demands. His requested salary was less than half of what she'd offered. The first point was guaranteed flexible hours. "No meeting, deadline, or business trip will ever supersede a parent-teacher conference, a school play, or a medical appointment for my daughter." The second point made Victoria pause. "The creation and full funding of the Elena O'Connell Foundation, an independent charitable arm of Sterling Enterprises. Its sole mission will be to provide housing and financial assistance for the families of children undergoing long-term medical care." Liam leaned forward, his voice filled with a quiet passion. "When my wife was sick, the terror of losing her was all-consuming. But there was another, more insidious fear that crept in every night. The fear of losing our home, of our insurance being denied, of not being able to provide for our daughter in the chaos. It's an impossible weight. This company builds monuments to wealth. I want its legacy to also include building sanctuaries for people during the worst time of their lives. That's my price." Izzy looked at her mother, watching this unfold. Victoria was not just seeing a brilliant architect. She was seeing a man of unshakable character, a man her daughter had recognized and championed. This was the true lesson. Victoria closed the lavish contract folder and pushed it aside. She looked at Liam's simple list, then at him, and nodded slowly. "Your terms are accepted, Mr. O'Connell. Your foundation will have its first board meeting next week. Welcome to Sterling Enterprises, properly this time." Later that afternoon, Victoria drove her Maybach to the walk-up in Queens. She found Izzy packing a small box of books. The apartment, once a symbol of her punishment, now felt like a home, lived in, earned. "The 6 months are nearly over," Victoria said from the doorway, looking out of place in her tailored silk suit. "I've had your old room at the penthouse redecorated. It's ready for you whenever you are." Izzy smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached her eyes. She taped the box shut. "Thank you, Mother, but I'm not coming back." She patted the wall of the small apartment. "This place is the first thing in my life that is truly mine. I paid for it with aching muscles and calloused hands. I think I'll stay. It reminds me of what's real. She turned to face her mother, her expression serious now. I'm not going back to Columbia either. I sent in my application to the Architectural Technology program at the City College of New York. It's not as prestigious, I know. But I don't want to learn theory from a textbook anymore. I want to learn how things are built from the ground up. I want to understand the steel and the concrete, not just the facade. Liam taught me that a foundation is everything. Tears welled in Victoria Sterling's eyes, the first genuine, vulnerable tears Izzy had seen in a decade. The walls she had so carefully constructed around her heart were finally crumbling. "Oh, Isabella," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I was so wrong. I pushed you. I threatened you. I thought that if I could just make you a success, you would be safe. I equated security with love. I was so focused on the bottom line that I forgot to look at what was written on your heart. I am so sorry." She stepped forward, her arms open. "And I have never, ever been more proud of you." Izzy fell into her mother's embrace, and for the first time, it felt like coming home. They were not a CEO and a disappointing heiress. They were a mother and daughter, finding their way back to each other across a chasm of misunderstanding. 6 months later, the Dubai skyline was graced by the completed Solstice Tower. Architectural magazines lauded its unique, elegant silhouette, praising the innovative aerodynamic strakes as a stroke of design genius. Half a world away, on a once-neglected lot in the Bronx, a different kind of groundbreaking was taking place. A banner fluttered in the breeze. "Future home of the Elena O'Connell Foundation Family Residence." Liam stood over a set of blueprints, a confident smile on his face, looking every bit the master architect. Beside him, wearing a hard hat and steel-toed boots, was his new project management intern, Izzy Sterling. She pointed to a detail on the plans, asking a sharp, insightful question. Lily sat on a nearby bench, happily drawing the new building with a box of crayons. Victoria arrived, not in her Maybach, but in a simple sedan, carrying a large cardboard tray of coffee and donuts for the small construction crew. She greeted them by name. She watched her daughter and Liam, working together seamlessly, their shared purpose a tangible thing. She handed a coffee to Izzy, her hand lingering on her daughter's shoulder for a moment. "It's a good foundation," Victoria said softly, looking at the fresh-poured concrete. Izzy looked up, her face bright with a passion no trust fund could ever buy. "It's the best," she said, her eyes meeting her mother's. "We're building it to last." Together, the three of them stood, a family reforged, watching the beginning of a new structure rise from the ground, a testament not to wealth or power, but to the enduring strength of a foundation built on humility, compassion, and the courage to start again from zero. This story is a powerful reminder that our true value is not defined by our circumstances, our job title, or the name we carry. It's defined by our character, our resilience, and our ability to see the worth in others, even when the world overlooks them. Izzy Sterling had to lose a world of luxury to gain a universe of purpose. Liam O'Connell, a man who had already lost so much, taught her that starting at zero isn't an end. It's the most honest beginning you can have. It's about building a life based on what you earn, what you learn, and who you lift up along the way. If this story of transformation and second chances resonated with you, if you believe in the hidden potential within everyone, please take a moment to support our channel. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who might need to hear this message, and most importantly, subscribe for more stories that inspire and warm the heart. Your support allows us to keep telling stories that matter. Thank you for listening.